Hello, everyone. It is Wednesday. No, it's not. It's Thursday. I apologize. It's Thursday, June 4th, and we are gathering for our devotional time here at Robertson Wesley. And I am just getting myself ready, making sure that my technology is working okay and that I have everything I need. For you, that might mean just sitting down where you are. It may mean lighting a candle wherever you are, finding a corner of space. We record these live, all of the things we do here in the Robertson Wesley online offerings, but we also have them uploaded. So you can also watch these when you have time to be quiet and set some time aside. Or if you want to participate in the kids' church activities, you can do that when you have children or you're feeling youthful yourself and want to create something with Reverend Karen. They are available on YouTube as well as on Facebook now, and also you can connect through our website. At Robertson Wesley this June, we are concluding a whole program year of looking at the different marks of discipleship, the different ways that we show ourselves, God, and our community our faith lived out. We have processed how this all works, that for some of us, there are marks that are easier than others, and that there is no right or wrong way to quest in faith. For some people, it is the giving and serving aspects of faith that energize them the most. For others to do those pieces of discipleship, they need to have solitude and time for daily prayer and scripture reflections to nourish them. For others, it's the other way around. It is the quiet times that take discipline, or don't take discipline, and feel easy. And so whatever for you is a mark that you're finding, Sabbath is the mark at the end of our program year. And we've chosen it now to try and remember that all of the parts of faith come together in Sabbath, which is God's call for us to be balanced, to have both activity and rest, to have both seeking of justice in the world and seeking of an inner peace within. The resources we've been using in our Wednesday, Thursday are, of course, our Bibles. And this month I am walking with Walter Brueggemann through a book called Sabbath as Resistance. And he is likening our current cultures in North America with the cultures that the Hebrew people encountered on their faith journey and the culture that Jesus lived within as well. And we began our reflections yesterday looking at how the slavery that the Hebrew people experienced in Egypt was one driven by consumerism and by the idea that we can always make more even when we have less. To resist that culture, to have faith that God will provide enough and that we are enough, is hard work. And it reminds us that the Sabbath commandment is not to take it easy, but rather to do the hard work of trusting, of resting, of working. We Christians use the Sabbath tradition as taught to us by Jesus, as well as the Hebrew scriptures. And Jesus lived Sabbath differently than some of the religious teachers of his time. The religious teachers of his time had very strict rules that had come about in the history of the Hebrew people about when Sabbath was. It was one day a week, and when it wasn't. Jesus used love as his guide instead of the rule book of when Sabbath should fall. So during some days when he needed Sabbath, Jesus would withdraw. He would reconnect with God, with his core purposes and values, reconnect with his intimate spiritual friends, his disciples, before going back out into the crowds, into the villages. He rested in the midst of a busy day. He took Sabbath when it wasn't Sabbath. And then he also would choose love on the Sabbath day. And if love was calling him to work, to do ministry, teaching, and healing on that day, he would. He would break the tradition of Sabbath rules to ensure love and healing for all. And so while we enter into our meditation on Sabbath, we remember both that this is a law, a discipline that has kept our faith alive, and it is also a joy and a celebration of love. And so will sometimes seem to be beyond the rules. Love always expands our understandings. I'm going to, if you have a Bible with you, you can join me. If not, I will read aloud today from Exodus chapter 20. Exodus finds itself early in our Hebrew scriptures. It's the second book in this library we call our scriptures. And in chapter 20, the freed slaves have been trying to learn what it means to be free. They're hearing from their elders who their God is. This God who freed them is also a God who created the whole world, who is alive and moving with them. Their God isn't a God that is only in one country or only in one person. They have been enslaved by the Pharaoh, who thought of himself as a god, as well as having other gods he would worship. Productivity, riches, power. And so their freedom meant being with a God who would travel with them. And of course, they needed some order to their lives. Moses and God had set the direction. Miriam had taught them how to sing and dance. But what would be their core values? God said to Moses, "I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me." This is our first commandment, that no other gods will be seen as anywhere near equal to the God who brought them out of the land of Egypt, out of those houses of slavery where they were asked to always increase production. God also wants them to know that no object can equate itself to God, that both all of creation, God, humans, and everything else is not to be objectified, commodified. The Hebrew scriptures use the idols that others had for their gods as what becomes an image throughout the whole Bible for ways we focus our attention on things rather than God. So verse 4 reads, you shall not make for yourselves an idol, whether in the form of anything that's in heaven above, or that is in earth beneath, or that is in water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or worship them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing children for the iniquity of their parents, to the third and fourth generation of those who reject me. I am a God showing steadfast love to the 1,000th generation of those who love me and keep my commandments. God expresses a sense of emotion here. Emotion and being impacted by how we respond to God. God fears and is jealous that we would think objects could serve us, and says that that kind of thinking would impact generations, just like thinking that we have a living God who is with us, alive, moving with us on our journeys, that can give life and freedom to thousands of generations. The last of our first 3 commandments, all focused on who God is and how we are to relate to God, is this: you shall not make wrongful use of the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not acquit anyone who misuses this holy name. God is hoping that we will speak to God by name, be in relationship with God, and that we also will not take an image or the name of God and use it for a purpose that would harm or hurt. We will not use God's name and lie. We will not use God's name and commodify another human. As the imagination of the people of God has grown and grown, thanks to the Holy Spirit, we also think about this in the fact that many of us, when we were young, learnt one image for God that kind of became like a name for God. It's not bad to have an image or name that you hold most often when you think about God or imagine your faith. But to imagine that God only has one name, or one gender, or one understanding of the world limits who God is. And so many people turn to this verse, including myself, whenever I sense that I'm limiting God. I grew up in a church where the image of Father was predominant in when we spoke about God. We used the metaphor of a loving, patient, male, usually elderly. All those characteristics were given to God. And as much as some of us felt comfortable with that, most people realized that either because of who their father was, or because they could not connect with the identity of a male as loving or kind, they needed to hear that God is more, that God is all genders and beyond, that God is all figures of care and love and beyond. And so limiting our names for God, just like idols limiting an image of God, reduces God to a commodity or an object, when God is life itself. The first 3 commandments are God asking us to relate to God as the bringer of liberation, as alive and never limited to an object, and as one who we can name in a diverse amount of ways, because no name will ever be enough. We then come to the 4th commandment, which is the commandment about Sabbath, which we're focusing on for most of our time this month. Walter Brueggemann calls it a bridge commandment. Finding out what we have about who this God is, the God of creation and the God of liberation, the Sabbath commandment is a bridge to the other 6 commandments. And that is to help us remember that God cares about our relationship to God and our relationship to people. The last 6 commandments are about our relationship to one another. And Sabbath is the bridge. Sabbath reminds us how we treat others is about how we believe God is. And how we believe God is will impact how we treat others. Also, I find that when I don't know what to do in my relationships with humans, taking a Sabbath to remember who God is, that I'm enough, that God freed me, that God's beyond my imagination, helps me to return to people after my Sabbath with my core values of love and care and the commandments by my side. And so Sabbath reminds us to go back and connect in with God when we're having trouble with our neighbors. And it is essential, God says, to remember that how you treat your neighbors is crucial to me. I mean, there are 6 commandments on that one and 3 about God. The Sabbath reminds us that no matter how you and God are doing, to truly understand God, be in relationship with God, is to be in relationship with other humans and creation. Community as essential to understanding who God is. 3 commandments about how and who God is bridge us to who our community is and how we are to be together. Sabbath reminds us they must be connected. The 4th commandment about the Sabbath day we read together yesterday. It is to remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. It notes that for 6 days we will labor and do all of our work and then set aside the 7th day for God. That means no working for us, no work for our family members, no work for our neighbors or even our working animals. And even our guests or those who live among us who are different from us, they too would be offered a day of rest. This would mean we couldn't allow our immigrants to work when we have a day off. That when the refugees come, they are offered the same working conditions that we are. And why, you ask? Because in 6 days, God made heaven and earth, all that's in them and all that is in the seas. And then God rested on the 7th day, calling both the work, the produce of that work, and rest good. Rest is an absolutely crucial part to who God is. And so we, in the image of God, also need Sabbath. For the rest of today, I want to look a little bit at those 6 other commandments that follow and how they bridge back to God using Sabbath. The first one, well, probably all of them, you should know, were written originally in Hebrew and in what we call biblical Hebrew, so a language that's no longer spoken, though many people study and learn it. It is hard to translate any language, and so throughout the centuries, the Hebrew people who became the Jewish people wrestle about what these words mean. Who do they speak to and for? And so I'm going to read from one translation, but then also expand who that might mean for us, given what we know as current faithful people. For example, the commandment number 5 says, honor your parents so that your days may be long in the land that your Lord God has given you. And I want you to know that most scholars note that this means to honor the people who are older than you and help you run your household. The people who provide for you when you are young, who teach you how to live well, and who provide for you until it is time for you to provide for them. When the Hebrew people heard this, their parental figures would have been running both the household and the home businesses of their economy, which was a nomadic moving economy. And so it's an economical as well as a familiar relationship. We now know that then and now, it is not always the biological parents who fulfill the roles of elders and caregivers. So I want you to know that this commandment is asking of you to honor the elders in your life, the people older than you, who have provided, who have been steadfast in their care for you, both perhaps disciplining you so you can learn, as well as forgiving you as you learn. These caregivers that you are to respect and honor are not abusive, exclusive, or dismissive. Honor the people in your life who honor you. And so God is asking us that part of Sabbath life and part of being in relationship to God is to honor those who care for us, to try and learn from those who want to teach us the good way, a good way of being in the world. The next commandment is that we shall not murder. The Hebrew word that is used for murder is the word we would use for what we would call perhaps first-degree murder in legal terms. This means an intentional plan to kill. So there is room in the Hebrew understanding that at times death occurs by accident, that death occurs in self-defense, but that at no time shall we kill something, someone, solely for it to die, for it to not exist. That dismisses the God of love and the God of life. The next is thou shalt not commit adultery. The word adultery isn't a perfect translation. However, for the Hebrew people, especially in their early days as freed slaves, their understanding of community was based on the promises they made to one another. And so it was wrong to break those promises. Unfortunately, they had a lot of misunderstandings about humanity as they began their journey, including the fact that they believed that those who identified as women were property, commodified. And so the adultery laws that follow in the early part of the Bible speak very much towards the fact that women were the cause of adultery, no matter who actually caused the adultery, which led to much sexism and heterosexism. So I want you to understand, for you, And this is especially true for those of us who are not married, and thus we can't commit adultery in its formal sense of relationship outside of marriage. I always hear this commandment as saying, you must strive every day to be true to the vows you have made to humans. If you have vowed to be faithful to one person, if you have vowed to give your priority to your household of people, for monks, their vow is to their community and to the rules within their community. And so to commit adultery would be to break the monastery's rules, even though they will never marry. And so I ask you to think on that for this commandment. Not about adultery in its legal sense or its most legalistic sense, but rather adultery meaning breaking of vows. We are human. And while we will not break all of the commandments in our lifetime, we will break some of them. And another purpose of Sabbath is to remind us that when we do get lost in these 6 commandments about community, we are to bridge ourselves back using Sabbath to who our God is. Our God is alive and never going to leave us. Jesus taught us how forgiving God is, how steadfast God is to us, so that even when we break vows, God is waiting, holding us, loving us, so that we can make better decisions tomorrow. Three more to go. One is that you shall not steal. You shall not take what is not yours. The next is you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. That is a formal way of saying you shall not lie, especially when you're talking about other people. You won't go on a witness stand and say something that's not true, yes, but also in your daily life, you will seek to tell the truth, especially when you are speaking about someone else. You will not gossip about what you think maybe is happening with those people over there. If you do not know or you don't have permission to tell, we don't lie. Lastly, and for Walter Brueggemann, he says, this is a very important one, but the formal language of it sometimes trips me up. You shall not covet, envy, desire, really, really want. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's family, not their partner, spouse, children, or slaves. You shall not covet the animals they have in their yard, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. You shall not desire more than you have. You shall not envy and seek out something that is not yours. I find this difficult because it is both a feeling and an action. I sometimes envy things, or I feel envy, before I've even had a chance to think. Oh my gosh, that's a beautiful car. Oh my gosh, she has such a great job. Oh my gosh, wouldn't it be lovely to live in that house? And the feeling arises. The commandment is asking me to immediately recognize it for what it is. A desire for more than what God has given me. And also a thought of almost violence against another. Envy can bring us to, well, if I can't have it, they shouldn't have it. And that begets the other commandments. Covet leads to lying, stealing, to ending things and murdering things, and dishonoring the promises we have made to one another and the teachings of our elders. So this last commandment asks of you to notice when a feeling arises that would bring about envy, that will bring about breaking of another commandment. So there you have it, the 10 commandments. 3 telling you how God hopes you will understand God and relate to God. 6 about how to relate to one another, mostly in the do not category. Luckily, there are a lot of do's later in the Bible, but 6 do nots, trying to cover all the ways we could hurt each other and creation. And in between, a reminder that we are asked to regularly stop, breathe, and reconnect through Sabbath, through prayer to God, or through confessing of actions in our community. Sometimes we need to confess that we've forgotten to connect the two. I act out in the world and then I come home and pray to God. Sabbath reminds us it is one and the same. Sabbath is both an individual practice, but also a community practice. Again, both and. And the community aspect of Sabbath is to have in your life 1 or 2 other people you can call to when you need a reconnect with community or God, and you need a hand in that. One of the reasons we are all missing church so much is it gave us an opportunity to know we were not alone in this weird faith thing called, yes, there is a God, and my actions in the world matter. Both and. That's a hard life to live. And church, physically, when we were in the same room, we could look around and think, I am not alone. I am not alone in this weird and wonderful thing about believing God's love and forgiveness and enacting it in the world. So in this time when we cannot physically gather, I pray that you think of 1 or 2 people you can call, including Reverend Karen, myself, other people in church, but also perhaps a loved one that you know in your life, even someone from your workspace that you could call and say, hi, can you remind me I am not alone? Striving to learn enough to be good in this world, in at least good enough, so hard. We need each other. And God knew that when creating the 10 Commandments to remind us. God and community come together. May you have a most blessed weekend. May you find time to take fresh air in and good conversation. If you are able on Sunday morning, worship is at 10:30 live here. Tomorrow here at noon is the hymn sing, a chance for us to raise our voices with Aaron and Matthew. And I will see you again next week, Wednesday at noon and Thursday at noon, as we continue. We're going to look about where else in the Bible is this Sabbath described, and what would a Sabbath look like in the past, in the present, and in the future. God adores you, and I miss you. Take care, and God bless.